Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, as always, for joining. This week, I wanted to look at the very mysterious and mystical and difficult mitzvah of Parah Adumah. I'll just post actually in the chat group the link to the handout in case anyone didn't see it. So you should be able to download it from there. This is the opening section of the first of the double sedras that we read this week. Absolutely chock-a-block sequence of sedras. There's an enormous amount to talk about on them, but for this week anyway, I wanted to focus on the mitzvah of Parah Adumah, and this is a mitzvah which is a ritual, a set of a process that's followed in order to remove someone from the status of being Tommy Mace, from being impure, having come in contact with a dead body. And it's certainly a most difficult section of the Torah to understand. This isn't a new problem. We know that it's referred to by the Torah as a chok. In fact, it's not just any old chok. If we look in source 1, pasuk base, the second pasuk, zos chukas haTorah. This is the chok of the Torah. So this is a significant chok. A chok is the term that's used to refer to a mitzvah which is difficult or perhaps impossible for us to understand. This isn't a mishpat. This certainly isn't a mitzvah which is amongst the general laws of justice and open to human reason. This is not even a mitzvah. It's not something like Shabbat where we can understand that it's a method of us remembering Zechi Yetzias Mitzrayim or the like, but rather this is a chok, something which is all but incomprehensible to us. But what are we meant to do with it? Is there any relevance to us in this nowadays? Is there any insight we can draw from this? The laws of Tumah and Tara don't seem particularly applicable nowadays. There isn't a prohibition in becoming Tommy for anyone who isn't a Kohen. It simply represents some form of a spiritual state within which one is in. It affects one's ability perhaps to go to the Beis HaMikdash, to eat karbonos. Is this something that is this a set of halachas that in any way is easy for us to is there anything we can draw out from it, any understanding we can get? Now, before I go further, it is important to say that the categories that we're used to of mishpat, mitzvah, and chok are somewhat they aren't ironclad borders. There's some variation and shift between them. I already explained a mishpat is something where we can see the spiritual and moral value of it. We see how the worth of this mitzvah trickles down into societal functioning and into our benefits for us as moral beings. A mitzvah is something we wouldn't have made up by ourselves, but now that we have it, we can see how it works. We can understand the message in Shabbos and Tefillin, the symbols that they represent, and so on. What seems to us to be appropriate tamim, appropriate reasons for mitzvahs, can vary between generations. And we see that different thinkers in different times and different eras of history came up often with very different sorts of reasons, different ways of relating to a mitzvah. Because in fact, the meaning of the word tam isn't so much a reason, but it's more a taste. How do I connect to the mitzvah? What can I taste in it? What can I experience in it? And the problem with a chok is that there isn't really that much that we can easily understand and experience in it. And that's the challenge of trying to understand what a chok is, what it's all about. Now, on one level, on the most basic level, the idea of a chok is that the Torah wants us to understand that we can't understand everything. The point of the Torah ultimately is about a relationship. It's about an ability to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why we keep mitzvahs, not just because we're commanded to do so, but also because we want to understand them and use them as a spiritual springboard for our growth and our connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So why is there a point in a chok which we can't understand? And the answer is because a certain element of this connection is obedience, is deference, recognizing that by definition we are limited, we're finite, and that we should keep mitzvahs even when we don't understand them. So this is certainly one element of a chok. Perhaps a little more profoundly, there's always a danger in understanding the reasons behind mitzvahs, Because when we do understand them, Torah can become paradoxically a self-centered approach. It can become a glorified self-improvement system. It can end up back to being self-worship. So every time we think about the meaning behind a mitzvah, and we understand its depth, and we understand how it actually molds us into being a better, more spiritual person, the price we pay is that it now just becomes a popular self-help book. It tells us how we can improve ourselves rather than teaching us to transcend ourselves. Judaism is about learning to relate to the other, relating to the human other and relating to the ultimate other, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, perhaps another element of the chok is to realize that part of mitzvahs is about extending ourselves beyond our own understanding and doing things even where we can't see the benefit to ourselves, even where we don't understand, because we recognize that we need to reach beyond ourselves in connecting to those beyond us. In fact, more profoundly and deeply, in every relationship, one really needs these three sorts of mitzvahs, if you like. This can be in a relationship to our children, relationship to our parents, relationship to friends, relationship to a spouse, a colleague, anyone really that we're interacting with. We need to understand that there's meant to be the mishpat element of the relationship. That means there's meant to be a part of the relationship which we get also. We appreciate why this is something that they want. We recognize that this is a shared human need. A relationship, after all, is built upon relating to each other, on sharing goals, on sharing likes and dislikes, tastes and non-tastes. So this is the mishpat element of the relationship, how we see that the relationship is building us and enhancing our sense of self, and our commonalities and our shared goals. That's the mishpat element. Then there's a mitzvah element. In other words, there's some things which we may not perhaps want ourselves, but we can appreciate and understand why they want it. Even though it's not what naturally I particularly want, but I can learn to appreciate it. It's that, in a sense, the acquired tastes in life. It will never become me, but I can understand why this is important to them. And this is what a mitzvah is. It's not mishpatim, chesed, don't steal, things like that, where we naturally and instinctively understand this is also for ourselves, but it's more like a mitzvah, like a Shabbos or like tefillin, where we get the message behind it, we understand the value behind it, but it's not intrinsically what we would want ourselves. And then finally, there's a third element of a relationship, which is not just a plus in a relationship, but perhaps even essential, that there are some things in the relationship that we don't understand. We realize that our spouse, our child, our parent, our friend, our colleague is the other, that they're not identical to us, that there isn't a complete merging of identities. And we give them whatever it is that they ask for, whatever the particular thing, even though we don't understand it. Because love includes giving just for the sake of giving, even when we can't relate to it at all. So if our whole relationship is a chok, where everything we're doing to express love, we don't understand why this is what they want, how this builds them and how this builds us, then this is a problem. But there needs to be the chok element in the relationship, the awareness that no matter what, and no matter how close we are, we each have our own personalities, we each have our own needs. There's things that we can't and won't be able to understand. That they aren't me, there's someone different to me, there's someone with their own autonomy, their own space, there's anotherness about them. We can never know someone else fully. And this is the element of chukim in our relationship to each other and in our relationship to Hashem as per this concept of a chok. In fact, going deeper still, moving perhaps from the realm of relationship and psychology to more philosophical, that there probably are profound reasons why we can never understand everything about our situation, where by definition we can't understand outside the system, what makes the system into what it is. So for example, we can spend a lot of our time studying science, but perhaps we'll never be able to understand what is it that makes the structure of science itself. Why do we live in an ordered universe at all? Why are the constants of science what they are? Why are the laws of nature what they are? We can perhaps investigate and grow in an ever deeper understanding of what the laws of nature are, but perhaps not understand ultimately the framework within which they operate, within that created themselves. Because we're part of that framework, we're inside it, and we can't necessarily see out and beyond it. It's the same in maths and in logic. This is pointed out by Gödel and other mathematical philosophers, that we can perhaps apply the rules of logic, the basic ideas of logic, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, very fundamentals of logic. But what leads to these being principles of logic, we perhaps are left stuck with merely being able to say these are axioms. It's just the way they are, and not necessarily able to step outside them and prove them themselves. The Greeks were already aware of this problem. How are we meant to prove rules of logic? Only by using logic itself. So we can't step out of the system and see it completely as an outsider in which we're able to explain everything. And therefore, it's probably fundamental to the nature of Torah, which after all is a spiritual system, that there should be within it the rules that we can understand, that operate within the system where we can use reason and logic and understand what they're saying. But then there's the essential structure of the system itself, which we can't understand and which we refer to as a chok. In fact, this may be a very good translation of the word chok. Chok probably comes from the word chakuk, to be carved out. It's the very carving and delineation of the space itself. It's the structure of the spiritual world within which we live. And just like we can use the laws of logic, but perhaps we can't explain the structure about why there are laws of logic at all. We can use the laws of science, but perhaps can't explain the whole framework of existence itself. Why is there existence at all? Similarly, in the spiritual realm, we can have mishpatim and mitzvahs, where we can use the laws of our understanding of spirituality and morality. However, there may be the framework within it, the very structure that gives us a moral and spiritual existence that we may not be able ever to understand because we're incapable of stepping out of the system. So far, what I've said is our thoughts and reflections about the general concept of a chok, without looking specifically at this particular chok, the chok of the Parah Adumah that we're dealing with over here. What have we said about the general idea of a chok? We've said that it's probably, what we can say about it is that even though mitzvahs are about connecting to Hashem, they're about a relationship to Him, they're about developing ourselves spiritually, probably we need all three elements in a relationship. We need the mishpat element of the relationship, which is what we understand of each other, that we completely get, the obvious and shared goals and aspirations and tastes and desires. Then there's the mitzvah element, the part in which we appreciate why they want it, even if it's not generated from within ourselves. And then there's the chok element, the absolute ultimate otherness of every other person that we encounter in the world. Probably also an element of a chok is that this is important in our relationship, particularly to Hashem, the idea of obedience and deference, the idea of keeping things even when we don't understand them, and the idea that Torah isn't just a self-help system about developing ourselves, it's about transcending ourselves and reaching out beyond ourselves, and therefore we need a chok. And finally, we spoke about this in philosophical terms, that it may well be this is the essence of what it means to be within a system, that even if we can explain everything within the system, we can't explain the system itself, what brought the system into existence. And this, again, may be the idea behind the concept of a chok in the halachic realm. But now we need to go a little further and understand this particular chok. And there's two aspects of it that we really need to reflect upon. The first is the problem the chok is coming to solve, which is the issue of tumah, of some form of spiritual impurity, particularly tumas meis. It's not a ritual to remove any type of tumah. The Parah Adumah ritual is designed to remove the tumah associated with death. And this is the first thing that deserves understanding and explanation. And the second thing is, what is this ritual about? It has a lot of strange features. We take a red cow, which is completely red, and we burn it to ashes, and then these ashes are mixed with water and sprinkled upon the person who is Tommy, and somehow this brings them out of their impure status. A lot to understand in the mitzvah itself. We're not going to have time to resolve the whole problem. We're not going to leave this shiur understanding everything about Parah Adumah. If we were able to leave it, then perhaps it would cease to be a chok. But I'll try and offer some thoughts and insights into what we can understand of it, and hopefully also emerge with something that's relevant to our lives today, which seem very far removed from the world of tumah and chukim, the chok of Parah Adumah in particular. Now, the background to Parah Adumah, as I said, is the idea of tumah and tahara, often translated as ritual purity and impurity. Not easy words to translate. However, we can make a little attempt at understanding perhaps what's going on. And I want to start off by sharing with you in source 2 In the interest of time, we're not going to read it inside, but the Orach Chaim here on our Parsha addresses what it is that makes the Parah Adumah, Chukat HaTorah, the central chok of the Torah in general, and specifically the concepts of Tumah and Torah. And the first thing he says is that these are very human associated ideas. Something completely removed from human use and utility can't become Tommy. So raw wood or stones, unfashioned, don't become Tommy at all. Kalim, utensils, artifacts which I have molded and created into something usable, something that can serve my needs, that is a tool and a utensil for human functioning, these can achieve a low level of tumah. A higher level of tumah is that which can affect an animal, who is a greater life force, and then the highest level of tumah is human beings, who can become tomei fully and completely. And perhaps, and this is a further subject which is debatable both in halacha and raises other philosophical and hashkafic questions, perhaps Jews can become yet more tomei still because they represent human beings who have been given the gift and privilege of access to the Torah and the way of serving Hashem through that. Now, tumah is always associated, therefore, with humans, life force and functionality. Utensils, tools that we humans have, animal life and human life. These are the objects about which the concepts of tumah revolve around. And the Orach Chaim points out, and this is also an idea that Samson Raphael Hirsch speaks about, that tumah is associated wherever there is a loss of life, or at least a loss of potential life. So a low-level tumah is associated with a loss of a low level of life. An animal, for example, a dead animal, the carcass of an animal, has a tumah associated with it, which is a fairly minimal, relatively minimal or low-level form of tumah. The opposite extreme is a dead human being. There you have an enormous vacuum, an enormous loss of life, and this represents the highest level of tumah, avi avosa tumah, the father of fathers, the grandfather status of tumah, as opposed to a dead animal, which is a lower level of tumah, and so on. And then we have other forms of partial loss of life, which are also associated with tumah. So, for example, a metzora, a leper, is someone who is suffering from a breakdown in the normal functioning of the life force in the body. If tsaras literally means leprosy, then that's certainly the case. If it doesn't literally mean leprosy, it's still associated with a breaking off and a separation of the body from its life force. Tsaras is associated with tumah. Childbirth, interestingly, is associated with tumah. Post-childbirth, there's a vacuum that existed. The mother was carrying a life inside her, and now that life has left the mother, and therefore there's a tumah associated with that. The tumah associated with the monthly loss of potential life, a woman that could have carried the child and doesn't, is also linked into this idea. So these are ideas of tumah, the vacuum that is left when life ceases, or at least potential life ceases. Indeed, the very word in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew for a corpse is halal. In modern Hebrew, halal means a vacuum. Outer space it's used for. In classical Hebrew, means an empty space. A halal, a corpse, is a vacuum. There's an empty space that's left where life flourished previously and existed, and now it is empty. And there's a spiritual and psychological synergy or partnership going on over here, because with loss of life, with loss of even a trivial life like that of an animal, and how much more so with loss of a full human life, there's a confusion, a murkiness, a darkness, a bereavement, a loss of potential which descends upon us human beings, and we feel disconnected from spirituality, from ability to grow, ability to achieve and be ourselves. The more spiritually sensitive we are, the more we are focused on spiritual achievements, the more we're affected by tumah. The most extreme example of this, of course, is a kohen, who is super sensitive to tumah because of their unique role in the service of Hashem. And this sense of loss and absence means that, at least for the period of time within which one is tomei, one is not as easily and fully able to connect to kedusha, to holiness. Tumah, by the way, is not the opposite of holiness. Kedusha is holiness. Non-kedusha is chol, is the absence of holiness. Tumah is the challenge and the confusion and the murkiness of loss, which removes or makes more difficult the opportunity to achieve kedusha. Bereavement challenges us, it leaves us confused, the world doesn't make sense. And Tahara is a way of journeying out of this confusion, of this loss, of reconstructing meaning, of finding a way through it. So this is the process of Tumah and Tahara. And the psychology lines up with it. We know when we experience a loss, it's perhaps a loss that the process of childbirth is a time of great simcha and great happiness, but also it's the first stage of a mother letting go of the child. And in the same way as parents, when they see a child toddling off to school for the first time, or perhaps stands with their children under the chuppah, feel great joy at their children reaching and achieving this next stage, there's also a sense of loss. There's a sense of letting go. I'm no longer as intimately connected with them as I was previously. Even the process of birth is associated with a letting go, with a bracha, a blessing, and moving on to the next stage, but also a sense of loss and absence, which perhaps has psychological connotations to it also. And this, says the Orach Chaim, is the sense of the spiritual and psychological aspects of Tumah that perhaps we can relate to a little bit. But this is the general idea. What this is telling us is that we should be looking here in Paraduma. This is very much something we should be looking for that has a meaning and a message for us today. Because even though we can't keep the mitzvah of Paraduma, we don't keep the halachas of Tumah and Tahara in the normal classic sense, if this is true, then what's being taught to us in the Parsha of Paraduma, in the section of Paraduma, is the process of Tahara, is the process of leaving and emerging from this sense of loss and confusion and murkiness and darkness and emptiness, the vacuum that is Tumah. And this is certainly something that's relevant to all of us. We all go through periods of loss, we all go through bereavement, we all go through suffering, through a sense of confusion and murkiness. It may be a sense of lost potential, something I dreamed and aspired to achieve and I'm not going to now be able to achieve. It may be the loss of the actual and a bereavement in the fuller sense. And the story, the message of Paraduma is meant to give us some sort of guidance in how to deal with this. And here there's an interesting feature of Paraduma, because despite the fact that this is described as the classic chok, perhaps no halachas, no mitzvah has had so much ink spilt over it in explaining the reason for this chok. And I've printed here in source 3, I'm not going to go through it all, I've printed a whole drush, a whole midrashic explanation. In fact, Rashi does a double explanation, unusually on this parsha, in which he goes through the mitzvahs of Paraduma twice, explaining the symbolism behind it, what the cow represents, how somehow perhaps it's linking us up to the Egel Hazav and how it's coming to atone for us, and all the symbolism of red and why it's not allowed to have been worked and why it has to be burnt with cedar wood and with hyssop and with crimson wool. I'm not going to go through all of this now, but Rashi engages in an extensive midrashic reading of these psukim in order to help us understand what the ideas behind the mitzvah are. So by the time we've finished with Rashi, what actually is the chok over here? I mean, it seems that it is explained fully in Rashi in almost every detail. And the answer to this question is that when we look in the Midrashim, there's one particular feature of Paraduma, which is the chok element of it, the part which we can't understand. And this is cited in a Medrash. I printed it here in source 4, a Medrash Agadah, which says as follows: Zos chukas haTorah. This is the chok of the Torah. Lama nema kan chukas. What makes this into a chok? Lefi sheyesh lebal din litoin. Because the bal din, the accuser, the questioner, can argue. And they can say, Meinida, the para adumo liquid, mutarin l'tmeim, or mutamim l'misha tutar. There's a unique and bizarre feature about this, something almost paradoxical about the paraduma, that it purifies those who are impure and makes impure those who are pure, reflecting the halacha that the kohen who sprinkles the paraduma on the recipient becomes tahor through so doing, and the kohen becomes tomei through the process of delivering the paraduma. So this is what's at the heart of the chok over here. But here also, this seems like seems a little difficult to understand what is the what is what is this chok over here? What's the point of this? What is the explanation of this, and why is this such a big deal? So here we have a challenge. On the one hand, it has to remain a chok. On the other hand, we must be able to find a message in this and try and understand some meaning to this. And I think the answer to this question lies in the final sources, which are printed on page 2, which is a Medrash Rabbah. And the Medrash Rabbah says, Zeh sha'omar haKotev. This is what the pasuk says. Mi yitain tahar meitami. Who is it who is able to bring out that which is impure, that which is pure from that which is impure? Lo echad. Is it not the one, referring to Hashem? Kagon Avram miterach, and Avram came out of a terach. Chizkiyahu me'achaz. Chizkiyahu was the descendant of Achaz. Yoshiyahu me'oren, etc. A whole string of great and righteous people who emerged from impurity. And then it carries on in the second last line. Ha'olam haba me'olam hazeh. The world to come from this world. Mi osakain, mi tzivakain, mi gozakain, says the Medrash. Who can do this? Who can command this? Who can decree this? Lo yechido shel olam. Is it not the unique one of the world? So what this Medrash is telling us is that Parah Aduma grapples with the very essence of the paradox of creation. Because we live in a physical world with physical beings, trapped and inhabiting meaty physical bodies. And yet we aspire to transcend that. We have minds which want to achieve infinity. We have souls which want to connect to genuine spirituality. We want to touch immortality. We want to achieve things of absolute worth and purpose. And we know that we can achieve and aspire that. And the paradox of human existence is on the one hand, we emerge from that which is physical, and yet out of that we can build something which is so far removed from physical and so spiritual. Now, how do we resolve this conflict? There's a number of solutions that we don't accept. One solution may be that which is adopted by the faiths that believe in the power of a monastic life, is withdraw as much as possible from a physical existence. We don't believe that answers the question, because all it's saying is, we are pathetic, we are weak, we are physical. For some reason, God created us with bodies that drag us down, and now we need to cut them off and ignore them and minimize them to become as non-bodily as we can. We're second-class citizens. But this isn't the approach that this Medrash is taking and that mainstream Jewish thinking takes. The opposite extreme is to say, buy into it. We're physical beings, we're animals, we're born today, gone tomorrow. Let's just eat, drink, and be merry for the 70, 80, 90, 100 odd years we're given here on planet Earth. And that's it, just buy into the fact that we're physical beings. But once again, we don't accept that. We believe we have an neshama. We believe that we have the spiritual opportunity. So we're forced to deal with the paradox. We're forced to confront that out of the physicality can come spirituality. And it's because it's physical, it's because it's murky, it's because it's confusing, it's because it's dark. That's what gives us our unique potential as human beings to achieve something of worth. If we were purely spiritual and weren't inhabitants of this physical universe, then we would be robotic spiritual beings and couldn't achieve any true spirituality. We'd be like the angels, programmed to be good isn't good at all. It's only because we need to make these difficult moral choices that goodness can emerge from this. And therefore, this is the paradox at the heart of human existence, that we need to imbue our lives with meaning. We need to find purpose and spirituality in them. And this qualifies for exactly what we said a chok is about. A chok is about the system itself. A chok is bigger, larger than any of the other mitzvahs. It's not dealing within the system where we can say mishpatim, mitzvahs, we can understand why we are. It's dealing with the essence of human existence, why we've been brought into being. And there we need to walk this tightrope of understanding that there's an answer that we can ever strive towards and yet can never completely reach. We can work on unifying ever more, trying to sublimate and spiritualize every part of our existence and see the value in what it can be used for, and draw out of the darkness and the confusion that which is positive. And yet there's always a gap. It's always an eternal journey. It's never a destination that we can absolutely reach. It's like an asymptote on a curve, where you have where you have an axis and you have the curve going ever closer and yet never quite touching it. And the Medrash is telling us that this is the unique insight of monotheism. The reason the Torah is obsessed again and again with warning us of the dangers of avodah zarah is because it sees in idol worship a terrible spiritual danger. It's not just that we won't connect with Hashem, But that's this idol worship allows us to believe we live in a broken universe. We live in a universe made of disparate parts that can't be joined. When there's a storm, it's because the sun god is fighting with the cloud god. When good things happen, it's because the good god is looking after us. When bad things happen, it's because we live in this dualistic world in which the bad god is overpowering. But that isn't what we believe. We believe we need to draw out the spirituality from the difficulty. And this is why this is a chok. This is why it's dealing with the essence of the system. And this is why it's the chok, because it's dealing with the deepest mystery and the most painful experience of human life. Because we're not here forever. We're here some of the time. We exist for a period of time and then we're gone. And we need the chok to draw out of that the very thing which is matayah tameim is also matamet tameim is also matayah tameim. The very things which bring impurity into the purity of our lives is the very thing which gives us the opportunity to draw purity out of impurity. And the beautiful poetical words of the Medrash, Halo Echad, isn't it the oneness of God which allows Olam Haba, spiritual existence, to emerge out of Olam Hazeh, out of the physical existence that we inhabit. And therefore, paradum is the process of emerging from bereavement and from loss. It's telling us there is a chalal here, there is a vacuum, there's a loss. Something's gone, something painful has happened. There's opportunities I thought I had that I'll never have. There's connections I thought I'd be able to enjoy that I'll never be able to experience again. There's something very real in potential and actuality that I've lost. But I can fill that vacuum. Out of that, I can build something else, because we live in a world of Halo Echad. We live in a world in which we say, but is there not one? We live in a world in which these disparate elements are unified. They remain a chok to fully internalize it, to be able to look at the pain and difficulties that we undergo and say, yes, that was brilliant, that was positive, that was all worthwhile. Never. It always will remain a mystery. But equally, we can strive and aspire and reach towards unifying these two parts. Equally, we can fill that gap with meaning. And therefore, I've come to the end of the time allocated to me in speaking about the Parsha element, but I hope I've managed to convey some little trace of this idea of the powerful and beautiful chok, which is paraduma. It's not a coincidence that the single most significant chok in the Torah is dealing with the single and most significant mystery of human existence. We feel eternal, we feel immortal, we feel we can achieve things of absolute worth and value, and yet we know that we only inhabit our lives, our bodies here in a very limited way. We exist in time in a limited way, and we exist in space in a limited way. We have minds which can span the universe, that can touch the stars, and yet we're stuck here in our physical bodies on planet Earth, only able to exist in one place at a time, and only in one time at a time. And the resolution of this paradox is what the chok of the paradom is coming to tell us. It's coming to tell us, on the one hand, it's a chok, it's a paradox. It can't be completely resolved. And on the other hand, the essence of the answer is being able to bring unity, being able to see how out of the dark can emerge light, out of the bad can emerge goodness, out of the multiplicity can emerge unity and purpose and meaning. This is the very profound and beautiful idea that the Ohr HaChaim shares with us, and that the Medrash tells us here, these two Medrashim that I've shared with you in sources 4 and 6. Again, I recommend, I've tried to put the source sheets there in slightly fuller amount of detail than I knew I'd be able to cover in the context of the shiur, because I hope these ideas stimulate interest and discussion such that you can take away the source sheets and have a further look at them. So I will stop there in terms of the first part of the shiur, and we'll now move to the second part of the shiur, which deals with Hilchos Shabbos, and we'll move into from the realm of chok and philosophical, very profound philosophical ideas about life and its purpose, to the world of the halachas of Kotev, of writing on Shabbos. We began this topic, I think, last week already. We spoke a little bit about what writing is, what the malacha of writing is on Shabbos, and what the halachic parameters of it are. Very briefly, unlike Tzoveah, which is decorating and beautifying the surface, the significance of Kotev is that I've produced a symbol which carries meaning and content. The symbol can be a small picture, it can be a letter, it can be a number, and in certain cases it can even just be a mark. I can underline something, and even that can be enough. Roshem, even that can be enough to carry information and content. Kotev is about creating content and information in a lettering form, and that's what the melacha is on Shabbos. We spoke about that specifically in the context of Kotev, and then I discussed very briefly some of the more general rules around melacha, including the fact that if it is permanent, it is d'oraisa, permanently created lettering is Torah prohibited. Temporary lettering is rabbinically prohibited. If it has no permanence at all, then it would be mutter. So pressing a finger against a misty glass would be temporary, and therefore drabanon. Writing with paint or ink would be d'oraisa because it is permanent. Now, going further, moving on from our discussion last week, there is another. I'll just talk about some of the other essential features of Kotev, and hopefully use that to apply to some of the halachic scenarios that we need to consider. One element of Kotev is that the lettering has to be brought into existence through the process of Kotev, which means to say as follows. Well, there's one of two ways of fulfilling this malacha, but they all involve laying down the symbol onto a surface and attaching them in some way. So this can be the classic case of Kotev, which is writing, putting ink on a piece of paper, for example, in which case I'm writing the symbol on the piece of paper, and I've created it completely. Or it can be taking a pre-existing symbol, which was lying loose, and attaching it to a surface such that it now appears on the surface. An example of that is given by the Magen Avraham, in which he talks about a case of a paroches, a large curtain on the Aron HaKodesh, where someone sews on or attaches, clips on, not sews on, otherwise it'd be another malacha, attaches the lettering onto the paroches, and the Magen Avraham says this would be also a problem of Kotev, because I'm forming the lettering onto a surface. If I take existing pieces, existing lettering, and I'm neither attaching them to a surface, nor forming a letter, such as by writing a letter, as we've discussed, and I simply put two letters together, or even two parts of a letter together, but they are not attached or joined in any significant way, then this is not the malacha of Kotev, because the letter is already there in existence. I'm simply putting two letters next to each other. Or even if I'm forming the letter by just putting two halves of a letter together, that would similarly be mutter. So an example of this is playing a game of Scrabble. I put two letters next to each other, the letter M and the letter E, and it forms the word me, or the letter I and the letter T, and it makes the word it. It is true that I have formed a new word by so doing. However, since both letters were in existence previously, if I'm merely placing one on the side of the other, this is not the malacha of Kotev. If, however, I have a travel Scrabble set where I clip the pieces into a frame, then in that case I have the other issue, which is I'm attaching lettering to a background, and then that would be the problem of Kotev. That would be the prohibition of Kotev. So sometimes you have just a flat board in which the letters are merely placed. This is mutter. Sometimes you have a travel board in which the letters are clicked into place. In my Scrabble scenario, in which case this would be prohibited. This would be osa. What about forming a letter from two halves? So, for example, I have a ripped book. I'm reading a book and I get to a certain page and I see the page is torn in half, and I want to put the page next to each other in order to join the letters and be able to read the page. So, whilst there are some poskim who consider this osa, it seems to me that the mainstream opinion, like that of the Shmir Shabbos Kil Chasser, which is Zalman Arbach and others, is that this is mutter, because it does not, again, fall under Kotev, even though in this case, I may actually be forming letters. It's not just that I'm bringing two letters together, and I've got on one side TH and on the other side E, and by putting them together, I can see that it makes the word the. But even if I have the letter H split into two, and I'm only able to decipher it by putting it into one, making it together, even that would be allowed, seemingly, and so is the view of the Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasser, because the parts of the letter already in existence are merely attaching and joining them in a temporary way. They're not fixed together, where I have this issue of attaching letters to a background, and therefore this would be mutter. There's a very interesting and important shuvah of the Ramah. The Ramah we more generally know from his joint authorship of the Shulchan Aruch, However, the Ramah, besides writing his part of the Shulchan Aruch, also wrote, corresponded in rabbinical letters to shilas, the questions that were asked of him. And the Ramah wrote extensive teshuvos. And in one of his teshuvos, the Ramah discusses the case of the ends of a book, where on the lettering on the paper ends of the book, writing is formed by opening and closing the book. So if we have a sefer over here, imagine there were letters sketched on this. So therefore, when the sefer is open, one is unable to read the lettering, and when one closes the sefer, one is able to read the lettering. So the Ramah discusses whether this is kosev, to close the book because I'm writing and forming the lettering, and moichik, to open the book because I'm erasing the lettering. And the Ramah is of the view that this is mutter for several reasons. One reason is because it's designed to be opened and closed, and therefore this is no different to opening and closing a door, which is not the malacha of boina on Shabbos. And I mentioned this last shiur when we spoke about the temporary nature of a malacha. But the second reason the Ramah says this is allowed is because this is merely piecing bits of the letter together rather than forming a new letter. The piece is already there. The ink is there on the ends of each paper on the letter. I'm merely joining them in order to make the letter, and therefore the Ramah is of the opinion that this is allowed. Now, this is somewhat controversial because in this case, the letter really is pixelated. Each page only has a tiny droplet of a letter, and it's when many hundreds of pages come together that the letter forms. So arguably, in that case, one is actually forming the letter by bringing all these little pieces together, and maybe that's more analogous to the case of writing. However, certainly in a case where I have just 2 or 3 pieces which I'm sticking together, like in our scenario of a torn piece of paper, that would be allowed according to the mainstream opinion, and therefore this would be mutter. This leads on to a very common shiur that I'm asked, particularly at the moment under lockdown. A lot of people are going back to good old-fashioned jigsaw puzzles, and wish to know whether they can do jigsaw puzzles on Shabbos as a game. Now, I personally have never understood the idea of puzzles. If you want a picture, then buy a whole picture. If you want it in pieces, then keep it in pieces. Why should you create a picture, then cut it into pieces, and then put it back together again? You know, it's a bit like very Jewish foods. So we have matzah meal balls, knederlach. So we take a grain and we grind it down into flour. Then we join the grain together and we produce matzah. Then we take the matzah and we grind it down into matzah meal, and then we form it back together again, and we call this knederlach. So to me, this is what puzzles are, but there are people that do enjoy puzzles, and this is a very common question that's asked. Is one allowed to do puzzles on Shabbos? And this would depend really on the halachic discussion that we've just had. If the pieces lock into each other in a proper locking manner, then this might fall foul of the issue of writing on a background. However, if the pieces are relatively loose, as is commonly the case with a puzzle, they detach themselves, they fall apart very easily, then this would be mutter, even though I'm forming a picture by piecing the pieces together. Nonetheless, this is not writing, this is simply attaching pre-existing pieces, and this wouldn't come under the melacha of kosev. This is another scenario or application of this idea. Just to mention a few more cases of practical considerations when one thinks about the melacha of kosev. One question is photography on Shabbos. Every so often I'm asked about, can one, for example, someone is making a simcha on Shabbos, can they ask a non-Jew to be there and take photos on Shabbos? Well, the Jew can't take photos on Shabbos. The Jew can't take photos on Shabbos because this is either using electricity, if it's a more modern camera, or if it's more old-fashioned camera, then it is spilling chemicals, affecting chemical changes on the negative, which creates something which can be read and therefore would be kosev. I already mentioned last week that writing done on a computer, well, before we talk about writing on a computer screen, saving information on a computer, as takes place if one takes a photo using a digital camera, is not kosev, because no writing appears. It's merely affecting the electric charge on the storage device, whatever form of storage device one has, so this wouldn't be kosev. However, this would be a problem because of using electricity on Shabbos. However, an old-fashioned camera in which a negative picture is taken would be the malacha of kosev, and either way, I certainly cannot ask a non-Jew to do so for me on Shabbos. This would be amira liakum, instructing a non-Jew to do a malacha. If I'm walking along and photos are taken of me, this isn't a problem. I'm merely a passive passerby, and this is something being done on me or to me rather than me doing it, and therefore this would be allowed. And for that reason, we don't need to worry about CCTV, or if you're going for a walk on Shabbos and a tourist takes a photo and you happen to be in the background, or whatever it may be, this isn't a problem of Kosev on Shabbos. Writing on a computer screen is somewhat of a controversy. I've already mentioned that writing where you're storing the data on the computer disk, that's not Kosev, that's electricity, but it's not Kosev. Writing on a screen using the computer, it's arguable whether that would be called Kosev or not. The argument to say would be Kosev is, after all, lettering is appearing on the screen, and this lettering is semi-permanent. Maybe it's not permanent, maybe it wouldn't be a shiur d'oraisa, because it's only semi-permanent, it will disappear as soon as the electric current ceases. But nonetheless, it is semi-permanent, lettering is appearing on the screen. The counter-argument is that this isn't how screens work. The letter is formed from pixels which light up, and therefore the idea that this is Kosev doesn't seem so clear-cut. I personally am of the opinion that this would not be Kosev, but obviously either way this is an abstract discussion, because anyway it would be forbidden because of the use of electricity. Hospital x-rays, by the way, again, is something that comes up sometimes. If one is invited to the hospital for an appointment in which they wish to take an x-ray, if it's not something pressing or urgent, one should reschedule the appointment for a weekday, because one is asking them to do the malacha for one on Shabbos. If they wish to do it then for their convenience, then one is allowed to do so, because again, one is merely passive and they are doing it and they're choosing to do so because their scheduling makes it convenient for them to do it on Shabbos, and therefore in that situation it would be allowed. But in general, as with all medical questions, it should probably be discussed on a case-by-case basis. So these are some of the applications of Melachas Kosev, some of the scenarios of Kosev that occur. I did discuss a couple of weeks back the question of the mug, which gets warmed up by, which when you pour hot water into the mug, a writing or a picture appears underneath. I discussed it then in the context of Tzeveya, but I would like just to spend a couple of minutes discussing it now in the context of Kosev. So I pour hot water into the mug, and a picture or wording appears through the application of the hot water. Would I be allowed to use such a mug on Shabbos? Again, we discussed this last time in the context of survey, and I compared it to photochromatic lenses. But here I'm asking in terms of the picture, which is the issue of Kosev, of writing or forming, a picture, or indeed when the water is removed, moichik, because I'm deleting and erasing the picture. This, by the way, is also discussed by the poskim in the context of a thermometer strip. So this is a very similar idea. I apply the thermometer strip perhaps to the forehead, and lettering, a numbering rather, appears, which tells me what temperature I have. And again, this is using heat to make the number appear. Now, there's a number of questions over here. The first one is this an issue of groma, indirect causation? Because I'm pouring the water into the cup, and then that eventually diffuses through the surface of the cup and causes the lettering to appear. Maybe this isn't an example of direct action. A second thing is this Kosev at all? After all, I'm not writing, I'm merely causing the lettering to appear. And the answer is that this is Kosev. This is very fascinating. Many children are interested in the idea of secret codes and secret ink. Now, there are two forms of secret ink that were known in ancient world. One is referenced by the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi. It talks about certain traders that used to use an invisible ink, which they would apply to paper, and then they would send messengers to their trading partners using this invisible ink, such that their rivals wouldn't be able to read the paper, and their partners would get the letter and apply a layer on top, and the writing would appear, and they would be able to see the communication. The way it works scientifically is that the first layer makes the paper absorbent of this particular type of ink, and therefore when I spread the second layer of ink on the paper, the ink runs off everywhere other than where the first layer of writing has been written in the invisible ink. This is how this particular technology works. And the Yerushalmi discusses whether I can apply this second layer on Shabbos, and the Yerushalmi says this would be possibly an Issa d'Oraisa, because I'm causing lettering to appear min haTorah by my action. This is a possible d'Oraisa Torah transgression of writing, It doesn't matter whether I'm writing by a classic form of writing or by pouring ink, which forms the lettering. This would be Kotev. This is case number one. Case number two is discussed in more recent times. It's discussed by the Pri Megadim, a very important posek, Rabbi Yosef Ta'omim, who lived in Poland in the mid 1700s, and he discusses the classic kids code. I don't know how many of you read Enid Blyton when you were younger or experimented with this. If you write with orange juice or milk, it appears invisible on the paper, you can't see it. If you then heat up the paper, it turns brown under the application of the heat, and the lettering appears. And in this case, the Pri Megadim says that this would be Kotev d'Rabbanan. This would be rabbinical Kotev. Why would it only be rabbinical Kotev? Still also still very important, but not a Torah transgression of writing. The difference is because in one case, I'm heating up to bring out the latent colouring that was there, to bring out the latent colour, as opposed to the case of the traders in the Yerushalmi, where I'm adding a layer of ink and that ink is becoming absorbed, and therefore I'm creating new deraisa. Now, the case of adding the heat to the strip thermometer or to the mug, where the lettering comes to light, would therefore be similar to the Pri Megadim scenario of where I'm using heat to bring lettering to light, and therefore would potentially be prohibited d'Rabbanan. Nonetheless, there are many more leniencies here. Number one, it's temporary, it's not permanent. In addition, it's probably even less than temporary because it's designed to go on and off, analogous to the door opening and closing or the writing on the side of the book, which we mentioned from the Ramah, where lettering appears and disappears as one opens and closes the leaves of the book. And the Ramah is lenient, even a Hatzlin in that case, even though others are stringent. In addition, the application of the heat here is a slow process and therefore probably groma. And in the case of the strip thermometer, there is a medical need. And therefore, in the case of medical need, one can do so. However, in the case of the mug, there is no medical need. This is merely an entertainment device. Nonetheless, it appears to me that the mug would be mutter. And this is because, as I mentioned, in fact, what happens when you pour hot water into the mug, it doesn't cause the writing to appear. It does the opposite. The mug has a layer on top of the writing, which is dark colored, such that the writing underneath is not visible. The application of the heat causes the crystals on that layer to turn transparent, allowing you now to see the layer underneath. And therefore, I'm removing a covering to reveal lettering underneath, as opposed to actually bringing the lettering into existence. Now, there is a Tosefta, a Tanaitic source, that speaks about removing wax that fell on a Sefer Torah. So I'm laying on Shabbos, and I see I'm trying to read the lettering, and suddenly a word is covered with a drop of wax that fell on it. This used to be common, because obviously lighting in those days was with wax candles, and therefore if I had my wax candle over the Sefer Torah, and I was careless last year, a drop of wax may have fallen onto the Sefer Torah. I now try and read the Sefer Torah this year, and a letter is covered with a drop of wax. And the Tosefta discusses whether I can remove the wax that fell on the Sefer Torah to reveal letters. And some posts can consider this problematic. Interestingly, they say that the problem over here may be that of moichik, of erasing. We're going to discuss the malach of moichik next week. If I rub letters out in order to make space to write new letters, this is the malach of moichik, because I'm preparing the ground for writing. So these posts can argue this is more than moichik. Not only am I preparing paper for writing, I'm removing the wax to reveal actual writing. And therefore the problem here wouldn't be writing on Shabbos, the problem would be removing a layer in order to reveal the writing underneath it, which would be the malacha of moichik. However, the consensus of the poskim is that there's no issue whatsoever. It's merely like opening a lid. When I remove the wax off the Sefer Torah, I'm simply removing a cover. I'm not doing anything significant. If it was an ink layer which was actually absorbed into the paper, and I removed a layer of ink to reveal a layer of ink underneath it, like is done in, let's say, picture restoration, then maybe everyone would agree that I am indeed bringing a new picture to light. However, in the case where it's merely a cover like wax, this is simply like removing a lid. This wouldn't be a problem. And it seems that over here is the same thing. This is a black crystalline layer stuck on top of the picture or the writing underneath, which becomes transparent through heating it, and therefore this would not be moichik, this would not be kosev. In addition, as we said, via heat, it is d'Rabbanan. It's even less than that. It's temporary, so it's a double d'Rabbanan. It's even less than temporary because it's designed to go on and off as per the svara of the Ramah. and therefore this would be mutter to do on Shabbos. This would not fall foul of Kosev or Mochek, and this would be allowed. I'll mention two other scenarios just because we've got a couple of minutes left, and then we will stop. One scenario is when one is asked to sign consent for medical treatment in hospital. Obviously, in such a situation, if there's a medical need, one may have to do so, but one should do so with a shinoi in order to avoid the problem of kosev. Another example where one may be asked to sign on Shabbos is a parcel delivery on Shabbos. We're all at the moment living off Amazon and getting constant deliveries. Many of these arrive on Shabbos. In general, by the way, there is no technical prohibition on making an order for delivery to arrive on Shabbos. Nonetheless, this is appropriate to avoid so doing if one is able. The reason there's no technical prohibition is because it's several folds, including, if I have an interest in them particularly delivering it on Shabbos, there may be a problem. However, if I just want the delivery and they choose to deliver it on Shabbos and that's the day they offer me, and if I don't get my delivery, then I'll have to wait for a while. I have no particular interest in it, especially coming today. I just want it to arrive. This wouldn't be a problem with asking them to deliver on Shabbos. More than that, if they commit to delivering on Saturday, they could be delivering it after Shabbos also, so it depends on the hours of the delivery. So there is a question here about delivery and which deliveries one can arrange for Shabbos or not arrange for Shabbos, but assuming a parcel does arrive on Shabbos, you ordered it and it was going to arrive in the next 3 days and it happened to arrive on Shabbos, obviously one wouldn't be allowed to sign for it, and one wouldn't be allowed to ask the non-Jewish delivery man to sign for it, because you want him to sign for it, you're asking him to sign for it so that he won't take it back to his depot and then you'll have the hassle of having to pick it up, and therefore you can't ask him to sign for it. However, one is allowed to be merames in this situation, so if he chooses to sign it, or if one just says, I'm not allowed to sign it, but you can do whatever's most convenient for you, he'll often be delighted because he wants to have the delivery out of the way. He doesn't want to have to take it back in his van and drop it off in the depot either. And therefore, you can certainly allude to them that you will not be upset if they sign. But you can't explicitly say to them, please sign it for me, asking them to do a malacha for you on Shabbos. So these are some further scenarios of Menachas Kosev, which we've discussed. Other common scenarios of temporary writing, which are D'Rabbanan writing, are these slates that little kids use, where they etch, there's like a wax slate, and then you can remove it just by sliding something up and down or along. This is temporary writing, and again osa, but temporary, and therefore D'Rabbanan. What we will look at next week, however, is a whole series of prohibitions which ostensibly at first glance have nothing to do with Kosev, and yet are nonetheless forbidden on Shabbos because of a gezerah that they might lead to writing. And this is a whole family of prohibitions connected with transactions and commerce on Shabbos, because transactions and commerce are very commonly associated with writing, accounts and documents and receipts and the like. Therefore, there's a whole family of prohibitions, very, very important prohibitions, connected with giving gifts and making sales on Shabbos and the like, which are important to learn. And these come under the heading of Kosev because they are part of the rabbinic family of gezerahs connected with writing on Shabbos, and that's what we will, please God, look at next week. So I'll stop there, and if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. But in the meantime, I wish everyone a good evening. Thank you so much, as always, for joining. Lovely to have you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.